A Swift Kick in the Ass, episode 66.
All big changes start with a swift kick in the ass. Join the journey of lifelong friends, John Curren and Tom Stewart, as they make conventional thought bend over and take a boot to the keister. Warning, listeners may notice a force equal to or greater than needed to get your ass moving. A swift kick in the ass, living life on your terms.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart, and I'm joined with my lifelong childhood friend, John Curren. And today, John, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, something happened. All of a sudden I stopped hearing myself. I think my cable was out.
Sometimes that's a good thing, Tom.
All right, let's redo that.
Okay.
That's weird. All right. All right. 3, 2, 1. A Swift Kick in the Ass, episode 66.
All big changes start with a swift kick in the ass. Join the journey of lifelong friends, John Curren and Tom Stewart, as they make conventional thought bend over and take a boot to the keister. Warning, listeners may notice a force equal to or greater than needed to get your ass moving. A swift kick in the ass, living life on your terms.
Welcome, I'm Tom Stewart, and I'm joined with my lifelong childhood friend, John Curren. In today's episode, Blame is Lame. John, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, Tom. You know, blame is lame, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I could not find any redeeming quality at all in regards to blame. Now, that's not to say that people should not take responsibility, or that things when they do something wrong, that's something different than what we're talking about today. Just so we can just lay the definition out, and I'm sorry to do this because I hate being so cut and dry, but blame is the act of censuring, holding responsible, making negative statements about an individual or group that their action or actions are socially or morally irresponsible. And the opposite of the word blame is praise. So you can be blameworthy if you do something wrong and people are trying to hold you accountable, or praiseworthy. You're worthy of praise. And it's like I said, it's one thing to call things out and hold people responsible or accountable for their actions, but it's quite another thing to blame people. That's more equated to finger pointing, or it doesn't really solve any problems.
You know, John, I went to the ancient Chinese text, the Tao Te Ching, and actually there's a verse. I was just curious because I've had this sitting on my shelf. It's one of those books I picked up in the bargain bin, and I flipped through it, and verse 79, the toxicity of blame. Now, this is ancient wisdom. This is from China. Like, this is even predates Confucianism, if I understand correctly. And it's harboring a resentment is sure to leave some resentment behind. How can this be good? It cannot. Therefore, the wise accept all responsibility. Now, that's just a portion of that text, but this goes back in the Bible, biblical. If you read the Bible, you hear stuff like this, and it's just a matter of stepping up and accepting where you are in life right now is based on the choices that you've made in the past. Sure, there could be some conditions that maybe put you in, something bad happened to you. Maybe you had a bad childhood. But the thing is you choose how you react, and you can't blame others. You can't say, oh, because of this, because of that, or because of this boss, or because of this wife, or this spouse, or this friend, or whatever it was that I'm in this situation. Maybe those things happen, but it is up to us to choose our reactions to those events in our life and become better.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I want to touch upon a few points that you just made. So one thing is, things that happened in the past are in the past. They don't really matter, other than because you can't change them, but you can reflect on them and make differences in the future. That is something you should focus on, rather than focusing on things that happened in the past that you have no control over anymore. Um,
Listen, that reminds me of something that's happened to me where I had a friend that fell off the wagon. He was an alcoholic, and recently he had stumbled upon and started drinking again. And when I was talking to him, he was telling me that I'm that he's a bad person. He was apologizing to me for being such a bad person and all this stuff. And I go, look, man, you're not a bad person. This, there's a situation, there's a condition that you're going through, but I equated it to like a boat. When you're on a boat and you're driving, I mean, you're cruising through the water. On your boat, you leave a trail, right? A wake behind you. That wake is like your past. It doesn't steer where you're going. You can see it, you can learn from it, but you move on. You don't let it define you. And you are like a clean slate and you can do whatever you want in that next moment.
Yeah, and that's what the definition of life really is. It's the summation of all of your experiences brought to get that brought you to that point. Brought all of your experiences brought together to to that point. You can't change the past. All you can do is focus on the future. Um, it's really easy to blame yourself for this or that. One of the other points I want to talk about uh, before on what you're saying, Tom, was it's very reflective of choice theory. I know we've talked about choice theory before on this show, and for those of you who aren't familiar with choice theory, it's basically the idea that we can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. We can control our thoughts. We can control our actions. We can even control our feelings. Beyond that, it's outside of our control. And I think it touches upon blame. Is if you're blaming other people for for something, um, it's not very it's subjective. It's not very objective. Um, you're not accepting, maybe you're partially to blame as well, or you hold some responsibility. Um, if you're there's even something as no whereas victims of crimes blame themselves and for that happening to themselves, and they think about now I'm not a psychologist or a doctor, so I'm not trying to diagnose anyone or anything, um, but I am familiar with the victim mentality, and that if you consider yourself the victim, then it's everyone else's fault, um, and sometimes you are to blame, sometimes you aren't, but it's very easy for victims to blame themselves for things that have gone wrong, or things that have happened to them when it's really been outside of their control, and they were maybe in the wrong place at the wrong time, uh, but they aren't to blame at all. So it's something to think of.
Who
They should have, I guess, what your friend said, is called behavioral self blame. They feel that they should have done something differently, and they feel at fault, and that's all. I guess it's good to accept responsibility and recognize that you could have done something differently, but when that holds you back, and it really starts to eat away at your soul. Um, I think that's a bad thing. It can really get in the way of you doing the right thing in the future.
especially in the case of alcoholism, what tends to happen is, or any addiction, you become isolated. And when you're isolated and you start thinking I'm a bad person, and maybe you're try to overcome this situation by yourself, and it's really difficult. That it's almost impossible. You need to reach out. You need help. And when you're in isolation, you keep on telling yourself all these bad things. You're just like, what the hell? I suck anyway, so I might as well have another beer. I might as well have a shot of Jack. And it's just a really a perpetuating wheel of doubt and
It's
anger and
it's
resentment of yourself. And then you take it out on others usually when you're around and you make bad choices.
Yeah, especially there are two types of self-blame, and what you were talking about was really called characterological self-blame, and that's where there's undeserved blame based on character. Like you said, you're like you have a feeling of helplessness or passivity, um, or loss of control, or some type of guilt or shame, that's making you feel hopeless and really full of despair
You just hit on
based
a big
on,
one. Shame.
yeah,
Shame is probably one of the worst, and that goes hand in hand with addiction.
yeah,
And
you know,
it's one of those things where you don't want to talk about it. You don't want anyone to know those inner secrets or those skeletons hiding in your closet. And it can be such a detrimental feeling. Shame is probably one of the worst, man. That's a very, very hurtful emotion.
yeah. Is it being Catholic, I could say this, but is it Catholic guilt, or no, it's guilt and shame. I know there's a difference between Jewish mothers and Catholic mothers that use this technique quite often to either guilt or shame you into behaving behaving the right
Shame
way.
on you. Remember to point the finger at you and move the other index finger over it like they're whittling it down like a piece of wood. Shame on you for doing that.
Yeah, I'm just really trying to lighten the mood too, especially with everything that's been going on recently, and a lot of finger pointing here and there to different groups. And we try
Well,
not to try not to
obviously,
let it go
yeah,
on there.
he's what John is referring to is the divide in the nation right now. We try to keep these episodes evergreen where you can always return to them, but there is, with 5 police officers were just killed inside Dallas, Texas, and a lot of it was out of anger and a boiling point that has built up. And how does this, how this responds to um, blame? Is people are starting to blame each other for different things. You blame one police officer's actions on another and take it out on them, and it's bigger than that. And I was talking to John about this, and a lot of it stems out of fear, which is very related to blame. Lots of times, what you don't understand, you fear, and when fear comes, I used to like the quote Master Yoda from Star Wars: "Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering." And that's exactly what's happening. The cop, when he comes up to the car and is afraid someone's going to pull a gun on him, acts probably irresponsibly and shoots someone, and it just leads to a perpetual motion of I mean, the guy's scared. You can hear it in his voice when this guy's girlfriend was recording the guy that got shot. He was just saying, "Hey, he's doing what he had a concealed carry permit, right?" So he said, "Officer, I have a gun," and he was reaching to get his wallet, but the cop, out of fear, shoots this guy, and it's a tragic misunderstanding, I think, on both parts. And the guy that was just trying to do the right thing, he's like, "Hey, I got a gun, and I'm just gonna, that's what I'm supposed to do. I have a concealed permit. That's what I'm supposed to do when an officer comes up to the car." He was doing the right thing, and he got shot for it anyways. And we see these injustices, and there happened to be another one, across the country, what, a day apart. And this year we've had other ones, and it reaches a boiling point and people are upset, and then some lunatic somewhere says, I'm going to make a difference by killing a bunch of cops. It's sad. It's sad in every regards, because there is much to be learned on both sides, and something has to be done, but I don't know.
Yeah, there is definitely prejudice and hatred, and I, for one, cannot speak for anyone but myself. Um, so I'm not going to say that I understand what it's like to be uh, black and in America. I don't understand what it means to be black. I can only speak from my own perspective. I cannot speak as a police officer either, because I am not a police officer. But but hopefully I can be objective enough to kind of take a step back and try to put myself in their shoes and try to relate the best that I possibly can. There's no there's no way for me to walk in their moccasins, so to speak, and to live that life. Um, but I do agree that blaming and pointing the finger one way or the other, it does not help us move forward. It does not get to the real root of what is going on here. And prejudice is prejudging. It's recognizing. It's making a judgment call, and that's something that all of us do. It's make judgment. Um, but doing so before you know all the facts. That's judging someone on the color of their skin, or the uniform that they wear, or the job that they have, or it it's it, it's not right because it applies it, and it's labeling. I know we've talked on the show, is very, very powerful. You recognize, think back about when you were in school, and maybe some of you are still in school and living this, but labels would get attached to certain people. You were a jock, or you were a burnout, or you were a bookworm, or a band geek. All these different names. They Some of these labels stick, and they're very difficult to get rid of. Um, once you have them, if you were known, if you were a very friendly, quote unquote friendly girl in high school, who maybe had sex with her boyfriend, and word got out, and stories grew, and she all of a sudden, she's no longer a good girl, she's a slut. And that can have some very far-reaching implications, because when that person starts to really believe what they hear and identify with that particular group, it may or may not be true at all. And government has a long history of uh, using these labels to instill fear within each and every one of us. I'm not saying our government, I'm just saying governments in general around the world recognize the power of the label. And isn't that what we're doing? We're saying, you know, pointing the fingers at one group or another based on profession, or based on skin color. I'm not, as I said before, I'm not black. I'm not a police officer. I really don't know what that feels like, but I can empathize to a degree, and I can recognize that a police officer, in doing their job, pulling someone over for a minor traffic offense, um, does not know who they are dealing with. And there have been plenty of police officers who have been shot by different members of the public, at a routine traffic stop. They lose their life. It's a scary situation. It is fearful, and fear is what keeps us alive, isn't it? It's fight or flight is our in our basic instinct. It's in our DNA. So and on the other hand, I get very nervous whether I've done anything wrong or not, being pulled over by a police officer.
Of
Um,
course, of course.
you just never know what to expect. But it's scary, I think, on both sides. And how
And
do
let's touch on racism for a second, John.
sure.
Eh, You know, they always say, you see little children don't know. They play with each other, they don't care, right? But somewhere along the way, we start to learn, and we learn at a very young age. And I'm going to refer to something that, back in middle school, John can remember because he went to my middle school for a little while. Our middle school was probably about 40% black. Um, the other 60% was white until the Muriel boat lift. And then we had, the Muriel boat lift is when Castro opened up Cuba, and he sent a bunch of refugees come to America. So when they tried to integrate those kids into the school, every day there was these race riots. And like I'm talking about after school, and some of the older kids from the high school that was next to us would come over. I remember walking with my saxophone in one hand and my books in the other, and I'm just walking to the bus, and this high school kid comes over and punches me in the face for no reason, just because I was a white kid. And it's sad because we carry those things with us. And I, at the same time, around that same age, I was hanging out with one of my friends, and someone had got their bike stolen. Right, it's one of a mutual friend. So three of me and two of my friends were hanging out in this kid's garage. So about 10 black kids ride by on bikes. My friend I'm with goes, "Hey, that's my friend's bike." So all these kids turn around and start coming at us. So my friend lowers the garage door. They kick the garage door open, and kick through the panels, and we're scared because we're outnumbered. We don't know what's going on, and we have this fear in our mind going on. So his older brother is about 16 at this time, and he was cleaning my BB gun. He flings open the door, points the BB gun at the kids. They think it's a gun, and they take off. One kid's so scared that he jumps off his bike and leaves it, and we start chasing him, right? Because now all of a sudden we got courage because we have this kid with a
Yeah,
fake
the
gun with
table's
us.
turned.
Right, right. So we go and we catch one of these kids, and the 16-year-old starts grilling him, and the kid was crying, and then the 16-year-old guy starts saying, "Oh, do you like watermelon? Do you like fried chicken?" And I never felt so dirty in my life. I felt disgusted that this was happening. I was like, yeah, just let them go. It's they don't have the bike, and it was a really bad situation. And another kid came back with a police officer, the kid that left his bike, and they were scared. They thought that they were getting someone was chasing them with a gun, and we did it all out of fear. I mean, it was just bullshit the whole way, on both sides, and we were kids. But we
Yeah.
learned this somewhere. We've learned it from our environment that we're growing up to, and that people carry that with them. And you try to shed that because it really is. It's a bad thing to harbor, but it's just something that made me recall this. And these things still happen. That's why people think, oh, when a cop shoots a black guy, oh, he had some prejudice or some intent. And I think that we're getting over that, but it's still there, and it's a difficult situation.
You know, I'm a kind of person that likes to look for the silver lining in any difficulty. And one thing I've noticed recently, as long as we're on the issue of race, is that I recognize that there are a lot of good people out there, and I like to think that there are more good people than bad. So when I'm out and about, what I've noticed is that when I'm dealing with people of color, I mean, there is definitely a change. And what I've noticed is actually a very positive change. Is that not only am I trying to make more of an effort to say, you know what, it's fine. We're all people. I have nothing against you. I don't know you. I'm not prejudging. I'm just living my life just as you want to do. And being, I'm kind of going that extra step and being nicer. But I've noticed that people of color have been much nicer to me, much more polite. Like I was in the grocery store, I'm just pushing the cart, just like you normally do if you're in the grocery store, and this black guy comes around the corner, and you know these aisles are tight. You don't see what's coming. It was an honest, it happens to everybody. It got tight, and he didn't even really come close to me, but he apologized to me, and I'm thinking, I told him, I was like, no worries, don't worry about it. It's not a problem.
Well, I think everyone is aware of the situation right
Yeah,
now and the tension, and the good majority of people don't have those feelings. But it's it's just sad. It's
it
sad in
is.
all ways. I
But
mean, I don't know what the solution is other than what comes to mind is Michael Jackson's "Man in the Mirror" song. The change starts with us. The change starts with how we react and how we see the world. So it's
yeah,
only us that can make a difference.
yeah, and talking about Michael Jackson, it's my understanding when he wrote that song, he wasn't necessarily feeling that way about himself to begin with. I mean, he recognized that change does begin with who you're looking at in the mirror, but he was really trying to talk himself up because he was not feeling very good about himself. I understand at that time. He wasn't not he was self he was blaming himself. He didn't like the things that he was doing. He was apparently had some addiction problems, substance abuse problems, and and he knew that he was headed down a road that was eventually going to kill him. And he wanted to change that, and he wrote a brilliant song that I think we can all learn by. So even Michael Jackson, he was trying to make this world a better place, but he himself was flawed, just like all of us are flawed. Uh,
Here's the lyrics real quick. I'm sure everyone knows this song, but you never know. But the basic lyrics are, I'm gonna make a change for once in my life. I'm gonna feel real good, gonna make a difference, gonna make it right. I'm starting with the man in the mirror. I'm asking him to change his ways.
yeah, I mean, I think it's good to look at yourself and recognize that change does begin with you. Uh, that's within your scope of control.
Right, and
We
that's what I
can't
was
change
that's why
other
I was
people.
referring that story when I was a kid, because that was one of those times when I started questioning, those around me that you would hear, we'd see it was real popular back then with the rebel flag.
Oh yeah.
And as much people will say, oh, the rebel flag just stands for the South, in our area it didn't. It standed for something else, and it was very I can remember having a rebel flag sticker on my BMX bicycle, like on the pads or something, and you ride around like, yeah, the South will rise again. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
crazy.
You
It's
know,
the stuff that goes in, and you learn from other people and other kids and friends. It's not like my parents were sitting there teaching me this. You learned it through osmosis of hanging around with these other white trash kids, and it happens.
yeah, I remember my dad. I had a rebel flag license plate, and I, I'm not sure if I wanted to put it on my car. I don't think I was even old enough to drive at the time. But my dad just hated that, and he says, "You're not going to put that on your car. You don't realize, you don't recognize what that flag stands for." And I think the same could be said too for the swastika. The Germans, Nazi Germany is really, when you say the word swastika, people just automatically think Nazi, but the swastika was actually a symbol of good fortune. And it goes back, I mean, into ancient times. It's been used in ancient civilizations.
Well,
Wait,
Hitler killed that one along with the style
oh,
of the little
oh yeah,
short,
oh yeah,
Hitler mustache, man. That's a style that no one's rocking these days, man.
yeah. I know, but it's a shame that something, a symbol of something positive and good that was in place for thousands of years is ruined.
Well, that's
For for forever, because it now what it represents to most people and is common knowledge, is something horrific. um it's and it just, I guess it's said, I guess that demonstrates that labels, and the meanings associated with the labels can change, for the better, or for the worse, as in the case of the swastika. And I hope that our country is at a moment to where we can start creating, putting more of a positive view on some of these labels, whether you're black or white, or if you're a police officer. I think our views can change.
it's when I was in my early 20s, I dated a Jamaican girl. And, I'm as white as white can be. I got light skin, blonde hair, and she was a black girl. And we would go out places. And I remember walking in South Beach one time, and this lady looks to me, and she's like, "Oh, there's one in every crowd." But then I would get it also from the black community. Black guys sometimes would really they would be upset that I was dating a black girl. And I remember it was during that time when Jungle Fever came out. I'd be walking through the mall, and that's all we'd hear is Jungle Fever, Jungle Fever. And it's sad because we're just two people that really cared about each other.
Yeah.
And we had all this outside animosity. And I got it sometimes from friends and family as well.
Yeah, I think interracial marriages, I think that must create a very strong bond, just for the reasons that you just mentioned, Tom. Is that society is, in many cases, against that. I think attitudes are changing. People are more open to that, and people are more willing to accept the view that you just presented, and that is that people are people, and love rec- doesn't look, it's colorblind. You
Yeah.
know, and I think that's, we're all entitled to our own opinion, and hopefully that we can all be open minded and not so judgmental, especially in matters that don't really concern us whatsoever. That's love is, and who you fall in love with is individual. I wouldn't want someone telling me who to fall in love with, so I'm not going to tell anyone who they should fall in love with, and that's just my view of the world. Um,
So back to blame. So there's a lesson to be learned in all failure, right? And we're talking about personal blame. We're not talking about blaming others for other actions. We're talking about things that happen to you. Um, Wayne Dyer has a good quote about blame, John. It's a little bit lengthy. Hope you don't mind.
Go ahead.
It's all blame is a waste of time, no matter how much fault you find with another. And regardless of how much you blame him, it will not change you. The only thing blame does is keep the focus off you when you're looking for external reasons to explain your unhappiness and frustration. You may succeed in making another feel guilty about something by blaming him, but you won't succeed in changing whatever it is about you that is making you unhappy. That's Wayne Dyer.
Yeah, I think back about on my corporate life, and when you're working for a big organization, and especially when you're new in a big organization, you want to make a difference. You want to stand up. You want to do what's right, and even if your thoughts are counter what everyone else is saying, I have always felt a responsibility to kind of raise my hand and speak up. But I can't say that I've always been strong enough to raise my hand on matters that I thought were important. And I'll tell you why. And I think a lot of people will understand this. If you've ever worked for a big company, you'll definitely understand this. How many times have you raised your hand and spoke up for something to have it later, come back at you, and people are pointing the fingers at you and blaming you for maybe something that you didn't do. If you say something, you take a stand, and eh, have negative things come back at you, and you're kicked down and punished for doing that, for taking that stand. uh, how many times does it really take for a person to say, you know what, forget that, I am not going to stand up, I'm going to do what I'm told, I'm going to be quiet, I'm not going to take risks to where I would take take on responsibility that isn't necessarily mine, or put myself at risk for being kicked again, like a dog. And they call that, blame shifting. It's the shifting of blame to someone, like, they call it the kick the dog effect, to where individuals in the hierarchy tend to blame their immediate subordinate. So, if the boss doesn't take responsibility, he blames his subordinates. And in fact, in the organizations, there's a good test of how strong that organization is based on how blame is handled within an organization. If blame comes from the top down, that's not good. Uh, again, like I said, it's passing the buck and or kicking the dog. Um, a good, strong organization, um, the blame will flow upwards, to whereas leadership will accept responsibility for things that happen wrong, rather than it being shifted on the shifted to the subordinate.
Did your kids watch Bugs Life?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so one of the leadership principles that you can learn from Hopper to Grasshopper is when he's telling I think he's talking to the ant, and he says, no, he's talking to another grasshopper, I believe, and he was talking about how in leadership everything is your fault. You let one little ant stand up to you, and they'll all stand up to you. Remember that?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. You know, and in fact, that goes along with that labeling theory that I mentioned earlier. It's labeling theory is really the use of propaganda. It's um, to assign blame to groups um, that don't necessarily deserve it. I think it's used all the time, and it does that absolutely does contribute to our fear. Like we all have had different experiences with a variety of different people, and that has helped form and shape the way we feel about those particular groups. If you think about it, that's not very fair because you're letting your experience with one or a very small group of people reflect about how you feel for an entire group. I mean, talk about prejudice. Um, it- you know, that's definitely something to think about in how you deal with the world and recognize. You know, it's always good. I think question yourself and question why you feel a certain way, and take responsibility for that. The
Well,
less,
that happens in, think of fast food restaurants. If you've ever been to a fast food restaurant and you have really bad service and you're like, I'm never coming back to this restaurant again, and you hold the whole chain responsible for one Joe Schmo's, lack of customer service. And so it's like lumping the whole place into it when, and then sometimes you go to another fast food restaurant and its service is great, everything's clean, it's fast, courteous. This is grouping a bunch of people together based on one event.
yeah, look back at the days of the Salem witch hunts. Um, we all recognize, of course, there are Wiccans out there, but there's no real such thing as witches or
There's not.
people who are taken over by the devil. I mean, at least I don't necessarily believe that. But there were groups of people that were, burned at the stake because they thought differently than others.
The
Uh,
Puritans.
yeah, then the Puritans. Fear definitely came into being, but a lot of innocent people died because of that. And um, it's a form of demonization. It's demonizing groups or groups of people that you really don't know about. I for one, I like to treat people as individuals, and but I also have my own you know uh, preconceived notions of who people
It's like
are.
the villagers in Frankenstein. He was just a nice guy, wanted to give flowers to little girls, and they wanted to burn him at the stake.
Yeah, because he was different. Had stitches. um, and again, we ourselves, Tom and I, we're not trying to pass judgment on any particular groups. We on this show, the Swift Kick in the Ass, we try to give you something to think about, and we can't say we always get it right, uh, but and we can make mistakes, but we try to open people's minds and get people thinking about not only their actions, but we'd like to think of our own actions as well. So we accept responsibility as well, and we're certainly not blaming one particular group or another in this.
Now, the solution, John, which we've talked about, and we don't want to touch too much on this because we have whole shows about accountability. But accountability is some way that you can help, you know, reach your goals and stop blaming yourself because you have someone that will help you. And it is when I was talking about alcoholism before, they have a system in effect basically in AA with sponsorships. So you find someone that's going to be your sponsor. Doesn't mean that person is necessarily knows any more than you. It's someone to listen to. It's someone that you can bounce ideas off or say, "Hey, I've made a mistake." They also have like a little chip system, like it looks like poker chips and medallions that they give, like, so if you're a month sober, they give you a little white chip. If you're 3 months sober, they give you another, like a red chip or something, and it progresses along till when you've been sober for a year or something like that. I think they give you a medallion. And what happens though is whenever you slip up and you have a drink or whatever, you go back to the white chip and you start all over again. And it's not a rank or anything like that. It's just something that you can tangible that you can hold to show where you are, and something to hold yourself accountable to. You know, the people in that group take these trips very seriously because it's a, you know, a representation of the recovery of how well they're doing. And you know, you're gonna fall, you're gonna have these things happen. One of our mottos is fall down, stand up, repeat. It happens. There's the same thing in goal setting or trying to make yourself a better person. You're going to slip up, recognize it when you do, and learn from it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was reading that it says a no blame culture has been widely considered to be a means to increase safety, or the feeling of safety, and they use this a lot in healthcare and in hospitals. So if you really think about that, if you have a no blame culture, you're going to have more people willing to step up and try to do what they think is right. Um, if they're not going to be, not going to be blamed. Our court system, in fact, operates really on a no blame. It's based on a no blame culture. I know people are going, "Oh my God, what is John? What did John just say?" It's our court system is really built on the premise that they are innocent until proven guilty. So that in itself is saying we're not going to just blame someone because they were accused of a crime. You have to prove, there's a system in place to prove whether or not they're guilty, and they have to, meet certain criteria to do that. In a in a in a blame culture, you're going to see just the opposite. Is that you are guilty until proven innocent. It's a much different way of viewing, viewing responsibility and accountability, instead of just jumping to conclusions and saying you did this, so you're wrong.
Off with his head.
Yeah, it's
It's like Game of Thrones culture where they're like, no, the king says off with his head. He doesn't believe him.
yeah, yeah, can't argue with you on that. But let's I think in many cases we talk about the victim mentality, and how that's not a good thing. A victim mentality, I mentioned this earlier, but it's worthy of repeating, is that when you feel like you're a victim, you feel helpless. You feel like you have no control over things. And that makes you passive. You're not taking action. You're not taking you're just letting things happen to you rather than you trying to take control of things yourself and take things into your own hands. Um, a lot of times we feel helpless, and we feel like our hands are tied when we're a victim. We feel like we can't change things, so why even bother trying? And I think really what the premise that this show is built on, is that we want to give you that swift kick in the ass to say, you know what, we're going to give you a hug first, a hug, and then a swift kick in the ass to say, you know what, it's okay, but get your ass moving and keep moving forward. Stop dwelling on the past. Stop feeling helpless, because you have a lot more control and a lot more say over things than you probably give yourself credit to do. So, we all make mistakes. We all do things that are wrong, or that they might seem right at the time, but then as we think about it, we might regret it, or wish that we didn't do it. We can't let those things like that hold us back. Uh, we have to admit when we make a mistake, take responsibility for that, hold ourselves accountable, um, in order to create positive change in our life.
On that note, John, I think unless you have anything further to add, I think it's a good time to wrap this up.
Yeah, I just want to make one mention about accountability, because it really does tie into to blame and fear and positive change. And, accountability really boils down to um, telling someone your plans, or telling somebody that you're going to do something that you would not want to tell them that you failed. Like, for instance, if you were, giving up drinking or giving up smoking or something like that, and you're telling your best friend, "Hey, you know what? I'm I'm stopping this. I'm not going to do this anymore." Um, i- if you tell that to someone, that you're not going to be afraid to say, "Hey, you know what? I slipped up," or that you will be afraid to tell them. That's a good thing. It's going to hold you accountable. Maybe I need a different example there. Um, I- our show, as you can imagine, with the summer and with our family lives, and our schedules, it gets very difficult to come together, um, to create the Swift Kick in the Ass. But Tom and I hold ourselves accountable, and it's not always that the timing is so great for one or both of us, but we feel accountable to you, our listener. Uh, we want to create content. We want to we want to make a difference in people's lives. That's why we do this, and we feel accountable to you for doing that. And that gets our asses moving. Uh, we're like, hey, we keep ourselves on task and say, hey, when are we going to podcast next? What are we going to talk about? How are we going to make a difference? And we keep each other in check that way. We are accountability partners, Tom and I. So when you're trying to make change in your own life, it's always helpful to share those goals with someone that you are by no means going to tell them that you failed. Like your parents are a great, I think, example of that. There's some things that you just don't want to ever share with your parents and tell them that you failed. Or your boss, you're not going to tell them that you know you can't do it. You're going to do whatever you have to do to get yourself there, rather than telling someone that you can't do it.
And accountability silences that little devil that sits on your shoulder and whispers doubtful messages in your ear, right? To have someone that you can go to and bounce things off, it helps silence that and puts you on a path where you can proceed and make change in your life, lasting change.
Yes. And I hopefully I'm not putting words in Tom's mouth with this, but I think Tom and I both feel the same way, is that, you know, with everything, all the hate and prejudice in this world, and all the horrific acts that are happening right now, I think it's our hope that some good can come out of this and make this world a better place. But it's going to take all of us coming together and putting blame to the side, and rather than pointing fingers, let's talk it out and let's find solutions and let's work together to make this world a better place.
Sounds good, man. Make sure you check out swiftkickinass.com. There you can find, for a simple email exchange, our membership site, which is free. You get inside there John's simple spending plan, some courses on how to change your life, and whatever else we add in there is yours to keep. Thanks for listening. I'm Tom. Peace.
This is John. Talk to you later. Peace.